All right, welcome back, everyone. Here you're watching right now on the CBS 8 app. Now that we know that the two candidates who they will be and who will advance to November in California's race for governor, state leaders are reacting to the big question: can a Republican win statewide office? News 8 State Matter political reporter Jenny Hubb breaks down their answers.
Well, the looming question for months has been, will it be a Democrat on Democrat or a Democrat on Republican come November? Now that we have the answer, prominent state and national Democrats are also finally weighing into the race to succeed Gavin Newsom.
It kind of eases your mind, right, that it's official.
We're excited and ready to get to work.
The leaders of the California Republican and Democratic parties reacting to the November face-off between Democrat Javier Becerra and Republican Steve Hilton.
Very solution-minded, right? He's a policy man. We want to help get California back on track, and that we vow to represent them.
I think he's got the experience that we need at this particular moment. He connects with regular Californians all across our great state and has the opportunity to be our first Latino governor in a long, long time.
Hilton, former Fox News host and advisor to a former British Prime Minister, pitching himself as the change to end California's one-party rule. Becerra, former state attorney general and Health and Human Services secretary under President Joe Biden, pitching himself as the reliable candidate with government experience.
Hilton will be on the attack throughout most of the campaign, and he will attack the California Democrats for running the state into the ground. Becerra will turn everything around and make this election all about Trump.
That's the big question. Can a Republican, especially with Trump's endorsement in both the primary and general, win statewide office? Democratic voter registration outnumbers Republicans almost 2-1.
A huge built-in advantage for Becerra in California because there are so many Democrats and because, quite frankly, President Trump is not liked much at all.
Becerra already using this card, responding, quote, all you need to know to Hilton's post thanking Trump.
I don't really think it matters. Whether he had the endorsement of President Trump or not, I think the Democrats' sort of go-to move is to align everybody with President Trump.
Ahead of the June primary, neither Becerra nor Hilton consolidated enough votes to be their respective state party nominees. Now they also have the support of their national committees. And for Becerra, once the underdog in the race is getting more notable endorsements, including Governor Newsom and Kamala Harris. Are you glad Becerra stayed in the race?
And certainly where Javier Becerra was 3 and 4 months ago, significantly different than where he was 3 weeks ago. Being the right candidate at the right time and being in the right place.
And another primary reflection, billionaire Democrat Tom Steyer, who came in third place. Experts say their takeaway is that money perhaps doesn't buy everything, as Steyer spent over $2 million but will not be advancing. Jenny Hubb, News 8.
All right, and as you know, it is Friday, which means that Jenny Hutt is joining us here all the way from Sacramento. So, Jenny, thank you so much for taking some time here. Jenny, I think for a lot of Republicans, a lot of voters who might lean Democrat, who are maybe wanting some change, they might look at these two candidates, and forgive me if it's assumptuous of me, but Steve Hilton is sort of the change candidate, if you will. So is that going to be enough this time around for Republicans?
It's not assumptuous at all, because that is, in fact, how Steve Hilton is pitching himself and has been pitching himself throughout the primary as that candidate, right? He's that agent for change. You kind of heard Republican Chairwoman Corinne Rankin allude to this as well. If people are sick of the quote unquote one party rule by Democrats and they're sick of the status quo, then Steve Hilton is in fact the change agent. And that is, again, how he will continue to pitch himself on the campaign trail heading into November. Becerra, on the other hand, is more so of that establishment Democrat. I mean, he is a status quo. He has that solid government experience, but he's also kind of risen through the ranks of the California Democratic Party. And so, again, I think you will continue to see Becerra attack Hilton as this Fox News host talking head, right? Which is how he's described Hilton in previous debates. And again, Hilton described Becerra as more of the same.
Sorry. Well, we're getting some early. We still haven't had like an official from a highly credible source that's not just like a private poll. But the most recent data that we have here about what the vibe might be and where the voters might be in the general election. I have it right here. This is from Berkeley, but this was May 19th to May 24th. Becerra at 52%, Hilton at 31%, 17% undecided. Jenny, do you think that that 17% undecided. It's not enough right now to overcome what would be a 52% from Becerra. Do you think that Hilton has an opportunity here to potentially take some independents, maybe even take some Democrats out of that 52% that might be leaning Becerra at this moment?
I'm going to say yes, because never say never in elections and politics, as you both know. So the potential is always there. Everything's on the table, I would say, especially for a contentious election like this. However, I mean, the Democratic to Republican registration advantage in California is nearly 2-1. So automatically you have that partisan and voter registration advantage for Becerra. I think it remains to be seen really how many of those independents, and like you said, perhaps Democrats could go to Steve Hilton in November. But also keep in mind, if this race does in fact become all about President Trump, a lot of Californians do not like President Trump. And so that is an automatic advantage for Becerra too, considering the fact that Steve Hilton in both the primary and this November general election has the endorsement of the president.
Do you think that depending on how the midterms shake up for Republicans and for Trump-backed candidates, that we could see Hilton's sort of use of that Trump endorsement change? Or is it essentially a safe bet that we are not going to hear a whole lot of Trump coming out of Steve Hilton on the campaign trail?
I think it's pretty safe to say we're not going to hear a whole lot of Trump. I mean, that's the same thing we saw in the primary. Sure, Hilton thanked the president for the endorsement, and he kind of boasted the endorsement and said, this is proof that he will make sure California has a good working relationship with the federal government. But we didn't necessarily see that be a talking point, right? We didn't necessarily see him bring it up in the debate stage. If anything, it was more so a point of attack by Democrats that, hey, he is a Trump-picked MAGA candidate, right? And so I think it's safe to say we're going to see more of that in November as well. I don't think Hilton is necessarily, regardless of the midterm results nationwide, I don't think we're going to see Hilton's messaging utilizing President Trump change much from what we saw in June.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he is not a candidate to mention Trump's name as a Trump-endorsed candidate. Something else we saw as the votes were being counted later on in the week after, he wasn't one to call anything out about potential election fraud. He went on CNN and he said he has lawyers on standby, but he hasn't seen anything to, you know, make him think that there was anything nefarious going on, which, you know, is a change from what we saw with President Trump. However, that is part of a larger conversation that has become at play here about the way in which California counts its ballots, the postmark policies. You mentioned here in another story this week that there's a bill out there to extend the period in which postmarked ballots could be received. You also mentioned a New York Times editorial, which we talked about when it came out earlier this week, calling for California to change that. So based off what you're hearing in Sacramento right now, what is the general consensus about it? We know that there's that bill. We know that there's frustrated Democrats. We know that there are Republicans that, of course, are against this. What are you seeing out there?
I mean, believe it or not, the consensus that the vote counting process should be quicker is bipartisan. I mean, Governor Newsom back in May even sent a letter to the local county elections officials of all 58 counties and said, hey, count quicker, because the longer it takes to process ballots and announce election results, the more mistrust in the election system, right, ends up becoming rampant. And so that desire is very much there. The disagreement is kind of in how we do this, right? The argument that California Secretary of State Shirley Weber and Newsom and other Democratic leaders push as to why California is so flexible with voting is that they want to ensure no one is disenfranchised. That's why even for mail-in ballots, for example, as long as it's postmarked by Election Day, it can be received and counted up to 7 days after Election Day. So that was June 9th in this case. And for mail-in ballots, again, if I, for example, sign my signature a little differently than what is on the record, they would send me a notice and give me a couple days to cure my ballot. So, little things like that, kind of what's in state law that, again, allows voters to really ensure their ballot is counted are what ultimately contribute to lengthier count time. So that's kind of, again, the pushback by Democrats. But again, they emphasize slow does not mean inaccurate. Slow does not mean fraudulent. Like you said, Steve Hilton himself, he's very frustrated with the slow vote counting, but he's not saying it's fraudulent. You heard the same by the California State Republican Party Chairwoman, Corinne Rankin. She's also frustrated, but she agrees it's not fraudulent per se.
And I think before you go to your question,
Yeah,
it's
no,
important
no.
to notice that
Yeah.
this might change without them doing anything with
Right.
the Supreme Court. That's looming over the heads of everyone.
That is, and the point that I was going to make was that signature verification process, which oftentimes is what is slowing down those results, that is something that Republicans would normally argue for because it's a way to ensure that you are not having fraud in your election. So it again, this also does come back to the fact that California has more registered voters than, again, the next state. I believe Jenny, it's like New Jersey is the difference between California and Texas in terms of like 1 and 2. Like there's a whole state. Yeah,
Oh,
it's
is it?
it's one of
Okay.
my favorite stats. So next question though, going back to Sacramento, Governor Gavin Newsom, obviously the ongoing feud here in Sacramento about return to work orders. We know that has been contentious. You're there. You're in Sacramento. What is the status of that? Are we seeing workers continue to go back? What are we seeing as the very latest in terms of that headline?
Look, state employees, very simply put, are not happy about this,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we all know how prominent telework became in our lives. Even us, we're utilizing an online video platform right now, post-COVID. But the mandate is July 1st. That is when all state employees will have to go back to the office for at least 4 days a week. And this mandate, keep in mind, it was already delayed in implementation from last year because there was so much opposition by unions representing a lot of these state employees. And keep in mind, these unions like SEIU Local 1000, very, very powerful figures in California politics. So they have a huge weigh in on this. But Governor Newsom, very adamant that he wants people to return to work. He wants that personal connection between people, that physical interaction. He wants them to go eat in downtown Sacramento to revitalize the small businesses, right? So it's this ongoing feud back and forth. But at the end of the day, that July 1st deadline is fast approaching. And here in Sacramento, off Interstate 80, actually, the latest opposition is very visible. There is a massive billboard
Wow.
with a not
Yeah.
so flattering picture of the governor, basically saying like it's going to be a $225 million traffic jam caused by Newsom. That dollar figure is what the state auditor's office said the state essentially saves by allowing employees to work from home. So it's a spicy debate up here, to say
Yeah.
the least.
Okay. All right. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for sharing the very latest that is happening in not only the governor's race, but also in Sacramento. Can't wait to check back in with you next Friday on a whole host of other topics.